Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Ava Marinelli. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the communications manager here at the Linked Learning Alliance. Like I said, we're thrilled that you're here today. We're going to give folks just a few minutes to trickle in and join us. Elizabeth, if you don't mind going to the next slide. As we wait for folks to join us, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. Please feel free to share your names, your pronouns if you're comfortable, your role, and where you're calling in from so we can get to know who's in the room with us. And we will go ahead and get started in just about a minute or two. And as we wait for folks to trickle in, I also just want to give a special thank you to all of our partners and co-sponsors for today's event, including the Center for Innovation in Education and Envision Learning Partners. We'll get started in just about a minute. All right, I'm sure folks will continue to trickle in, but we have a packed agenda today, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started with just some brief housekeeping. I know we've all been on Zoom for quite some time now, but if we go to the next slide, we have just some housekeeping reminders for folks for today's conversation. As you likely heard as you came into the room, this meeting is being recorded, and we will share this recording out with everybody who attended today, as well as folks who couldn't be here today. So you can come back and review the conversation as needed. Please feel free to use the chat throughout the conversation with questions, reactions, resources, and thoughts. We'll be sure to go back through the chat and gather up all your questions for the audience Q&A portion of today's event. But we please ask that you remain on mute if you're not speaking. During that Q&A session, we do welcome you to use that raise hand feature on Zoom and come off of mute when you're called on to ask your question. Resources will be shared in the chat and in a follow-up email along with this recording. So please be sure to keep an eye out for that. And if you have any IT issues or any challenges during today's event, please feel free to message me, Ava Marinelli, on Zoom, and I'm more than happy to help you out as I can. But with that, I would love to turn it over to my wonderful colleague, Renita, who's going to get us started.
Hi, thank you, Ava, and welcome everybody. I'm Renita Guha. I'm the Vice President for Strategy and Impact at the Linked Learning Alliance. For those of you who don't know the Alliance, we really lead a movement to transform the educational experience through high quality integrated college and career pathways. And at the Alliance, performance assessments are really an essential component of a high quality linked learning pathway. They are embedded into our pathway certification standards as part of our rigorous program of study. And performance assessments really serve as an authentic means for students to demonstrate acquisition of academic and technical knowledge and the college and career and life skills and dispositions they're really going to need for success after high school. And we really see performance assessments as part of a balanced system of assessments for measuring what students know and are able to do. And I wanted to just do a little bit of level setting before we jump in, because I know there are a lot of folks here who have been in this work for a long time, but maybe some new folks. And so I just want to make sure that everyone has just a basic grounding before I turn it over to our wonderful panelists. And I think I just want to also underscore that what we're talking about today is not new. There have been folks who've been doing this kind of work all over the country for a really long time. For example, the New York Performance Standards Consortium has been doing deep work in performance assessments for over 2 decades. And now we have strong examples throughout the country, and you're going to hear about some of those today, from Fairfax, Virginia, to Colorado, to here in California, where networks like Linked Learning and Envision have really been leading this work. And so we're really excited to share some of that with you today. So just to ground you in sort of what is a performance assessment, I'm sure you've heard the term. For others, it might feel like a little bit of jargon. So if you're not really familiar with performance assessments, I think the most straightforward way a lot of us talk about it is in the frame of a driver's test. So you take a written test. It's a multiple choice standardized test. That's kind of what we all know. But then there's the behind the wheel assessment that gives the assessor real information about a test taker's ability to safely operate a multi-ton vehicle. And at the same time, preparing for that test helps improve the skills that you're going to need to be a good driver. So that gives you kind of an example, and it highlights, I think, what are some of the key elements of a performance assessment. Requires a student to construct an original response, which can measure higher order skills and reasoning skills, as well as the ability to apply learning to solve meaningful problems. And there are really clear standards and skills that are being assessed, which are communicated ahead of time for a student to practice and get feedback on and then work towards. And so there's a whole range, right, of performance assessments, and those can include Something simple like composing a few sentences in an open-ended short response, developing a thorough analysis in an essay, conducting a laboratory investigation, or completing original research. They can also be much more extensive, such as a graduation portfolio or a capstone project, and you're going to hear about some of that today. And they're typically evaluated using rubrics, which are scoring guides that have been developed that list the criteria by which work will be judged and describe different levels of quality for each criterion. And so these assessments are really intended to be formative, summative, and iterative processes that allow students to demonstrate acquisition of content knowledge, skills, and dispositions in ways that might not show up on a standardized test. And so what does a high quality performance assessment look like? And so our friends at Envision Learning Partners who are here with us today have developed a guide to the creation of high quality performance assessments. And they define those as opportunities that allow students to elicit evidence of learning that matters. They're tight on criteria for success, yet inclusive of different learners' approaches with a lens towards equity. And they're loose enough for every student to thrive in this type of assessment. And finally, they're authentic and relevant to the industry students will be working and leading in. And so we really see performance as a learning experience in and of itself. It's an assessment of, as, and for learning. And as students move through a performance assessment experience, they're really learning about themselves and the content. So I come to this work as a researcher, so I want to make sure that folks know that this is really evidence-based work. Evidence shows that performance assessments can improve instructional quality and increase teacher collaboration because teachers are really encouraged to teach higher order thinking skills. And then they're also working together and collaborating to develop tasks and rubrics to review and score student work and to analyze results. It also really, they've been shown to increase student achievement on traditional standardized tests, showing gains on both standardized tests and performance assessments for students who are exposed to a problem-oriented curriculum that features regular performance assessment. And the evidence also shows that performance assessment can really improve students' deeper learning and socio-emotional learning competencies by engaging them in complex interdisciplinary problem solving and allowing, I think quite importantly, for choice, student agency, reflection, revision, and collaboration in the learning process. And so there's lots of great work that's been done in this area. There's been a lot of conversations about the role of standardized tests in college admissions, especially during COVID times. And I want to share with you some research that Learning Policy Institute conducted recently. It's a study on a City University of New York pilot with the New York Performance Standards Consortium that uses performance assessments to admit qualified applicants with scores below 500 on the SAT. And there were some really promising findings from that, which showed that after a year, the students in the pilot, those that had the lower SAT scores, actually had a higher persistence rate, higher credit completion rate, and higher GPA compared to the general uni student population. And so there's just a lot of really great research and promising practices in this space. And I'm hoping you'll take some time to look at some of those links that we put in the chat. And with that, I want to turn it over to our team of amazing moderators for today's conversation. I'm excited to start off by introducing a graduate from Envision Learning Schools and the University of California, Berkeley. Her name is Yvonne Armenta. Yvonne, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey everybody, how's it going? As Renita said, my name is Yvonne Armenta, and I'm thrilled to be here and engage in conversations about measuring what truly matters, and that's students and agency in their education. I went to an Envision school in San Francisco, California, at the time known as Metropolitan Arts and Tech High School, and I'll get into a bit more about my experience later on, but I was born and raised and still reside in the Bay Area, so I call California home. I'm the oldest of 3 siblings and first-gen college and master's graduate. I'm currently in internal communications manager and creator of Chats with Yvonne on Instagram. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it back to you.
Thank you, Yvonne. We're so glad you could be with us today. And then I'm also joined by our wonderful friend and colleague, Paul Leather for the Center for Innovation and Education. Want to introduce yourself, Paul?
Thank you, Renita. I'm really glad to be here on the call with, as you mentioned, real friends and colleagues who I so very much admire. I'm a partner at the Center for Innovation and Education, calling in from what is now almost snowy Concord, New Hampshire. But I facilitate a national interstate learning community made up of state teams with state policy, state intermediary, and local leadership roles. People on those teams all interested in innovative assessment and accountability.
All right. So I think, Yvonne, I'm going to turn it to you to take over.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Again, I'm really excited and I can't wait for our conversation. But before we get into it, Vera, I'd like to pass it over to you for a quick introduction of who you are. And I think that'll be followed by a video.
Yes, hi, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Vera Nguyen, and I am a senior at a high school located in Virginia. During high school, I had the opportunity to take an independent study course and an internship course where I am able to work one-on-one with a teacher to create a Virginia anti-racism education website that is launching soon. And I also took AP Research and AP Seminar in 10th and 11th grade, where I was able to work on writing research papers, presenting, and conducting a research study. In AP Research, we worked on year-long study that was assessed through a presentation and oral defense and a research paper. The topic I chose to research was on student perspective on cultural responsiveness in the US history classroom. The following video is actually the first minute of the presentation I did for my exam.
Yeah, Vera, if you want to go ahead and give us a little bit of a snippet of what we would have seen in that video, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, of course. So I first started this research paper because of this research paper because of an experience that I had in my US history classroom. We were doing a class debate on slavery, and one of the questions that was posed was, should slavery continue to be legal in any of the United States? And I had some troubles with that question. And I know that a lot of the students were also uncomfortable with that question as well. And so one of the things that I focused on was researching what the stage we are at in Virginia with culturally responsive curriculum and practices in general. So that's the first few minutes of the presentation, but you can watch the whole thing if you want to.
Yeah, awesome. And I think the fact that you know how to talk about it so well is just a signifier of how much work and how much passion went into the actual project. And having been a student myself and a part of this curriculum, it's almost like the students that go through it, we have this special bond, like we get each other. And so I'd love to ask you, as my first question to you, is what makes this kind of assessment meaningful to you as a learner?
Yes, of course. I appreciate when teachers give the opportunity to choose the topic that you're talking about and also how you present your learning. I think the key component is options and flexibility. It makes it more purposeful and more personal when I feel connected to what I'm showcasing. In AP Research, I was able to decide what research topic I wanted to study for the school year. And that drove me towards learning more about culture responsiveness and allowed me to relate to what I'm learning to my experiences. And that increased my drive to direct the study and also probably increased the quality of my final product. And so I think that's one of the main drives, but also I think I do appreciate when there's student-led initiatives that are available. Alongside AP Research, I also took my internship, my independent study course, where I was able to guide my own learning and do a project for my own and expand on and learn more about my own passions and interests.
I love that. And someone in the chat said this as well, but student agency, and I think it's so important, right? And so I'd love to ask you about how you think this experience demonstrates what you've learned and how you've grown that can't necessarily be demonstrated through traditional standardized testing. You went into it a little bit, excuse me, but I'd love if you could expand on the differences there and how you truly saw yourself connected to the work you were doing.
Yes, I absolutely felt connected to the work that I was doing. When I was talking about independent study, I worked extensively on my interview skills and gained experience through practice interviews, and communication skills cannot be examined through standardized testing. no way. But the skill is such a vital role that is used to improve my daily life and probably others as well. And if it was assessed through standardized testing, I know well enough that my interview skills would not, my interviews would go horrible. And when it comes to skills, the assessment should not be the end product. It should show that if I were to continue, I would be able to proficiently use the skills outside of the classroom.
Yeah, I agree with that. And to think, right, a lot of what you're talking about and being a really great communicator is used externally and out in the real world, like we like to call it when we're in the classroom. So thank you for sharing that. You also sort of mentioned this a little bit, but I'd love to learn from you how your identity, your interests, and your passions were able to show up in your performance assessment and what impact specifically that had on you.
I had a fun journey with performance assessments throughout my high school experience. I had the privilege of I've been given multiple opportunities to choose the topics that I'm studying. In 9th grade, I did a paper on labeling cities like Harlem as ghetto and the impact it has on Black Americans. And in 10th grade, I did a research paper on social pressures to culturally assimilate in the US. And 11th grade, I did the research study on cultural responsiveness in the US history classroom. And when I look back at these, I found recurring themes of racial discrimination and societal barriers that became apparent. And I didn't realize what my interests were leaning towards these until the end of 10th grade. And this really shaped what I did outside of school as well.
Yeah, I love that. It's being able to bring the person to the work that you do, right? And to be able to do that, there almost needs to be a safe space to do that. So in what ways would you say you were encouraged to bring your identity into the assessment process?
I was given multiple opportunities to choose, and when students are given the opportunity to choose and have options for assessments, we're invited to show our identity in the assessment. We shouldn't have to mold our thinking to fit the assessment. The assessment should be shaped based on our thinking, and so assessments have to be flexible in order to do that. And I feel like I was able to see that clearly when I was able to choose and how I was being assessed as well.
Yeah, and I think it also offers people a diverse way of not only getting to know you, but of expressing ourselves. You know, as students, that's really important. And so my next question has to do with how do performance assessment experiences, how did they help you prepare for your future plans, whether that was college or your career or even community advocacy?
Right, of course. Well, after seeing all these recurring themes of racial discrimination and learning about social relationships and interactions, I realized that I wanted to go into sociology. So that's what I'm doing in college. So that performance assessments really helped me understand where I'm at and what I want to do in college, but also it helped me with my communication skills, in which I think is necessary for me in the future and actually now still. And when I'm able to do more than memorize, I'm able to do more critical thinking and practice communication, which are two things that are important for success in the future and get you farther than short-term memorization.
I agree. And again, the communication skills and being able to talk about what you're learning and about how you connect to the work is super important. And it's how we connect with people and even further our education. So thank you for sharing that. And my last question for you today, before we hand it off to, we move on with our rest of our speakers, you have an audience of educators, of people that truly care about their students. And so what advice would you give to education leaders as they're thinking about how students are assessed in the future?
Yes. I want to say thank you for all the educators. I appreciate all the things you do. Presenting learning should not be giving an option between performance assessment or tests, because that means that the curriculum leading up to the assessment is still molded by standardized test. It leaves less room for students to guide and expand their learning when the intent should be to put the student first. The curriculum should be shaped with the students in mind and not the assessment.
I agree. I love that. And I hope someone captured that and is quoting you right now as we speak. But Vera, thank you so much for sharing your story and helping us truly see how important this work is. I can see it in the way you talk about what you're doing and what you worked on before, that you truly are passionate. And I think that that's all that we could ever hope to see from everybody, really showcase that passion. So thank you. Let's stay connected. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to hear from our other panelists today.
Thank you, Vaughn. That was wonderful. Thank you, Vera. Really a wonderful story. If you've ever had an opportunity to hear Yvonne's story, that also is very well worth hearing. We're really pleased to have some notable innovators in performance assessment here with us today on our panel. Beth Blankenship, who has been doing some amazing work with the Fairfax County District in Virginia, and also supporting a community of practice across several schools in Fairfax County and the District of Columbia. Youngwon Choi, who is a well-known and well-documented story of how he led a process to bring performance assessment into his large urban California district of Oakland Unified. And Angela Landrum, a nationally recognized leader in both formative assessment and performance assessment in the Colorado Department of Education for many years. I have an opening question that I'd like to have each of you discuss, namely, why has your state or district, whichever is your context, moved in the direction of performance assessment, knowing that you have other methods of assessments in your toolbox as well? And I'll start with Beth. Please introduce yourself and tell us why your district has moved into supporting performance assessments.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coordinating this, Renita and everybody. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. So I am going to kind of take your question and look at it from the lens of a classroom teacher in a school, and kind of the work that's happening there. So I would say my district, my school, my state, but especially at the school level and in the classroom level, we are seeing and know that students are the center of the educational enterprise, and that students are the people who are creating knowledge and the innovators of our future. And so the whole hope with the performance assessments is that we are giving students opportunities to create and become kind of the leaders of our future. And that is really, I think, the approach and the hope and the guiding principle of certainly at our school. And I believe that is, and know that that is the guiding principle and hope of our county and our state, that the performance assessments are intended to be give students opportunities to curate and create lifelong skills, as Vera was talking about, right? Being able to apply their knowledge in novel situations and to build those competencies, right? We have the Portrait of a Graduate competencies in Fairfax County, Profile of a Graduate in Virginia. And so really the goal is that these performance assessments, the intended outcome is not a convergent idea that the students come to, but rather divergence, that students will come up with divergent responses that eventually will help them and us together tackle the thorny, difficult, and important issues of today and tomorrow. As you can see in Vera's work, that's something that she's really attempting to do. And as she said, that's not something that the standardized test could give her an opportunity to do. And as you see on the screen, our community of practice is a group of friends and educators. And what we do through our community learning that matters is we talk to students about the learning that matters to them, the experiences that they've had, and we are trying to kind of put together, okay, these are the things and the learning experiences that matter to students. Let's do more of that. And what are those performance tasks and how can we do it better? So thank you, Paul, for the question.
Thank you, Beth, for giving us an excellent perspective on this question, really from a suburban district lens. Now I'd like to shift to Young Wan, who will share on the same question from an urban district. Why has your district moved in the direction of performance assessment, knowing you have other assessments for the purposes of school improvement and student growth, as well as State Summit is available to you?
Thanks so much, Paul, for the question. And just want to say hello and just express how happy I am to be in this community with folks today. As Paul mentioned, I'm with the Oakland Unified School District, and I've been supporting performance assessment, specifically the graduate capstone project in our district, which is a research paper oral presentation that all seniors do upon as part of their graduation requirements. And the way I want to answer the question that Paul posed about why is to think about the kind of data that comes out of two different types of assessments: the standardized assessments and a performance assessment like a capstone. And so what's on the slide that you're looking at is a report that comes out of the SBAC, which is our version of a Common Core aligned state assessment that's required to be given to all students, specifically 11th graders in high school. This is an example. This is not a real student, even though it has a name there. It's from 2021, and it's a 5th grade report. And you can see that Sophia had a 2,540, which is within the standard met, and that from this data we can also tell, or from this report we can tell she was above average for her school, and she was above the state average. And so this is the information that we can get from the report that comes to families and to teachers. In a non-pandemic year, they said they were able to give us a little bit more information and be able to break down some of this data a little bit more by category, but it's pretty general. And so when we contrast that with the next slide, which is just a little bit of an excerpt from our rubric that we used for the graduate capstone research paper. And it's hard to read, so I'll just call out a few things. We have 4 scoring domains on here: argument, multiple perspectives, evidence, and analysis. And you can see that the skills really dig down to a level that teachers and students can really understand. So like the first bullet point under argument reads that the student is able to make a clear argument that answers a research question. Right, so we can assess that. A teacher can use that information immediately. A student can use that feedback immediately. And so what's really powerful and important about a performance assessment, in addition to all the things that have been articulated up to this point, is also how we use the data, right? And what we use the assessment for. Because data that comes to us through a standardized test, while it might be helpful for looking at trends or for research purposes to understand like where are we seeing disparities, but when it comes to the level of the classroom and what teachers can do, 100% of the time, teachers are going to use the data that they get from their classroom embedded assessments over what they're getting from a standardized test, because the standardized test is just too far removed from the daily practice of teachers. And you can see this really clearly in this rubric, that it's timely feedback. It's feedback that's highly detailed, and it's going to be embedded to the actual tasks that we're asking students to do. And for that reason, Oakland and teachers in Oakland have, placed a stake in the ground and said, like, we are going to continue to do this work, even though we exist in an ecosystem in which we're required to do standardized tests, in which our district and some folks in our district are also, very strongly, because they're required to focus on standardized tests and how we're doing on them. And at the same time, we've built a movement of teachers in the district that are really committed to performance assessments because they see the value for instruction. And I'll talk more later about like the how of how we built this movement of educators. But I just wanted to start with answering the why question. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Young Wan. And we will come back to hear a little bit more about the movement that you've created in Oakland with a number of teachers. Now, Angela, please introduce yourself as well and give us your perspective on the question from a state context. Why are you advancing performance assessment at the Colorado Department of Education?
Thank you, Paul. Well, Colorado has a history of trying to make connections between our K-12 system up through college and career. That those efforts go way back, and so there's been a lot of conversation between our K-12 communities and our other stakeholders outside the K-12 community about how can we make that a more seamless transition for students, and what are the needs of our industry, what are our needs of higher ed. In addition to that, our standards, our academic standards since 2008, 2009 have included complex thinking, complex skills that need to be assessed in ways that need to go beyond some of our more traditional standardized tests. Those have great purpose, but they're not sufficient. So ultimately, we were looking for opportunities to have multiple ways and opportunities for students to demonstrate their learning. So one of the ways that we're doing that is that in Colorado, local school districts determine their own graduation requirements, and they're predominantly influenced by higher education admissions requirements. However, in 2015, our State Board of Education adopted a menu of assessment options that require students to meet not only their local requirements, but one of the measures indicated on this menu of options as well. So we saw that as a policy opening for us to begin to think more broadly about the different ways students can demonstrate what they know. So one of those options is this collaboratively developed standards-based performance assessment. And so we're working with Colorado educators and other stakeholders to develop a performance assessment system designed for this purpose. And so from the onset of this work, educators and stakeholders placed a really high value on supporting students' essential skills development as they demonstrate content knowledge and its application. As we've heard a few times, it's become very important. And the performance assessment process it's content agnostic, it's student-centered, and it values local context, which is really important here. And our performance assessments are designed with an equity-centered approach that, when implemented with fidelity, I always feel like I have to say that, can benefit students, all students, students with disabilities, students that are English language learners, students that are in credit recovery, which is a big issue that we have at the high school, and of course, our students that are in our gifted and talented areas as well. Our educators have been able to develop some guidance in the areas of leadership and professional learning, school systems and structures, pedagogies, and school culture for schools and districts as they work to transform their local system, because this does not get done overnight. And there are many barriers to implementing these sorts of things. And our development efforts to date have resulted in some definitional clarity, which if you've never ever gone through a definition process, which I'm sure you all have, that's a major hurdle to get through. We've had some design element development that signals the attributes of high quality performance assessment. We've developed some performance outcomes that serve as observable behaviors of Colorado's essential skills, which has been an enormous component of this performance assessment work. We've developed a rubric and performance assessment design templates, online learning modules, synchronous PLC meetings where educators come together to use common validation and calibration protocols, which is going to add efficacy to this process. And ultimately, we're going to be using an online collaborative scoring platform as well. So we're well on our way to hopefully getting to a point where we can emulate some of the great things that have happened in New York, for example, and what's been done in California and New Hampshire and Virginia as well. So thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Angela. Now I think we're going to hear a little bit more from Yvonne about her story, as well as she has a question for the panel.
Yeah, thank you all so much for sharing. I think it's a great foundation for understanding how you are implementing this work in your specific areas. And I'd love to continue the conversation. I'd also like to share that, when I think about the impact of my experiences with performance assessment, I always go back to thinking about the ways that I felt empowered to take agency in my education. I felt like my teachers wanted me and I was rewarded for bringing myself to the curriculum. And while I always speak about my experience, whenever I think about the power of this and how it works for everyone really through, I do this through speaking about my brother. Well, on one hand, I mentioned I'm the oldest in my introduction, so I've always done things quote the right way. I've always gotten good grades and I was overall what could be considered a good student. My brother, on the other hand, up until high school, just didn't like school. And it wasn't that he didn't like learning, he just wasn't learning through traditional forms of schooling. When he got to high school, he was exposed to education for the first time, right? For a long time, my mom and I were worried about whether he'd decide to go to college. Not that we thought, that's what he needed to succeed, but we weren't sure if he would ever get a sense of direction for what he really liked and what he wanted to do. So through the projects that he worked on and internship that we were given time to explore in high school, he found his love for fashion, and it quickly became the lens he adopted for the rest of his classes, which I think is what's really important. When you're able to bring the student and yourself to the work that you do, everything that you're learning, you see it through the lens of what you truly love. So for math, for my brother, it was, oh yeah, that's textile patterns, right? I'm just talking as a non-fashion industry person. Art class, oh yeah, that's mixing colors and color theory. And now he goes to school for fashion design and merchandise and has his own streetwear clothing brand. So this type of assessment allows for students to bring themselves to the work that they do, to be themselves, to take agency of their education, and provides an avenue for students who aren't thriving with traditional forms of schooling, and not because they're not exceptional, right? But because it's no longer the best way to measure knowledge. I can speak for myself as well that this truly opened the door to my love for public speaking. I was always considered the shy child in school, at parties. I would always be the one in the corner knitting or reading a book. And I realized that it wasn't because I was shy or didn't like talking to people. It was because I'd never really been given the platform to actually use my voice. And this kind of performance assessment does that for everybody. And with that being said, I think my first question, and this is for the entire panel, I'd love to ask you, how are performance assessments a driver for equity in your context? I sort of just shared about how, my brother and I are two very different students, but we both succeeded under this kind of assessment. So maybe Angela, I'll go ahead and start with you.
Well, I spoke a little bit in my introductory remarks about some of the policy things that have been put forward that allow for equity to be at the center of this work, primarily our design elements that are the backbone of all of our performance assessment processes. So we're talking about, they're aligned to the standards. Are they accessible for all students? Are they relevant and authentic for students? Are they transferable? And what is the iterative process? So all of those things set themselves up very well to support a very equity-centered environment. But the other thing I'd like to add is that as we've been going through this process, and I'm sure all of you have experienced this, that the instructional strategies that are necessary for this kind of system to be effective heavily relies on formative practice. It relies on tapping into students' the funds of knowledge and funds of identity, and ultimately their engagement. Just as we heard Vera talk about, and you, Yvonne, about how it is that you were drawn into the work, and then because it was something that was personal to you, or it was something you could connect to. And that to me is the basis of making this a truly equity-centered initiative on our part.
Thank you, Angela. Young Juan, I'll go with you.
Thanks, Yvonne. So I wanted to pose a question which is kind of a thought experiment. And that question is, what would we do if all of a sudden we actually got all students to a proficient level on the standardized exams that we all administer? Right? Would that be a cause for celebration? Like, finally, we've closed the the achievement gap that we've been talking about. Well, on the one hand, I can imagine that being a cause for celebration, but then on the other hand, I can also imagine that being a cause of great concern, because for colleges, how would they distinguish? How would they know which students to select into their limited number of seats, right? How do they dole out the resources of these precious opportunities for higher education if they're not able to spread out the students on a bell curve and see which students are proficient and advanced, right? If everybody is showing proficiency and advancement. And so, the bottom line here is that, when we think about what is the purpose of standardized testing, we have to confront the fact that the function of a standardized test is actually to divide and sort people. And traditionally, the way we've done that is we've designed tests that divide and sort people along economic and racial lines, because those types of questions that produce those types of results, they tend to map really nicely onto a bell curve. And there's been a lot of research done on the design of standardized testing and why it's been aligned to these types of racial and economic biases. And so, by contrast, when we think about the role of a performance assessment, like what we've seen in Oakland Unified and what we've been doing with our graduate capstone, we've asked our seniors every year in an exit survey, how do they see the role of performance assessment? What do they see the value in doing these capstone projects? And what's interesting is we also get a curve, we get a bell curve also but our curve actually looks really different when you look at our racial subgroups. And it's probably the only data that I've ever seen presented in a district meeting that shows that higher percentages of Black, Latinx, English language learner, Pacific Islander students are citing that the performance assessments are actually more valuable than our white and East Asian students. And it's because I think, they actually are finally being assessed through something and having a learning experience that is doing all the things that Yvonne and Vera and others have been talking about. It's personal, it speaks to their identity, they have choice, they're getting immediate feedback, they see that they're able to grow and improve when they work hard, it develops a growth mindset. So all these things allow students to see the value of a performance assessment like a graduate capstone in a way that I think our standardized tests, really, provide an opposite, set of experiences for students. So yeah, for sure, performance assessment systems, I think, are key drivers for equity within any education system.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that thought-provoking answer. And Beth, we'll go and end with you for this question.
Oh my, it's really hard to follow that. So I keep going back to what everyone's been saying, that if it's student-centered and student-driven, then you ostensibly have an equitable experience, because meaning, understanding, and making meaning of learning is such a personal experience, and constructing knowledge and constructing understanding is just, I think, our ultimate hope for people. And so if knowledge is then given to people, then they are not really constructing something new. So I just keep going back to the fact that it needs to be student-centered, because every student is different. Every student has interests and values that are different. And then you get to the heart of the whole educational enterprise is the student and the development of that person to be capable, confident, able, interested, and in the world. So I don't know if that answers it, but.
That does. Thank you.
So for the next question, as promised, I'd like to ask Young Wan to speak more about the movement he teased us with a little while ago to bring performance assessment across the Oakland district. Was this done by a mandate from the district office, Young Wan?
Thanks, Paul. So, our work in Oakland really began through a listening campaign. And while we did have a graduation requirement for what we then called the senior project, it was being implemented in completely different ways by, school site and even by teacher. And so when we first started this work, we went around and actually spent months talking to teachers and listening to what are their concerns, what are their challenges. And they raised that this system was really confusing because, students were confused about the expectations. Everybody had a different set of expectations depending on who their teacher was or what school they went to. And so we decided in response that we needed to pull teachers together to develop some common expectations. And we began piloting that work. And over the years, really the last 10 years, we've seen teachers at the heart of the work, bringing their colleagues to the meetings, and eventually getting their colleagues to adopt rubrics that we were using to score student work. And we went over the course of those 10 years from 0% of students being assessed on any kind of common assessment tools to more than 70% of our graduating seniors being assessed using a set of district graduate capstone rubrics. And that work, I'll just say again, it was really critical was the fact that we were really paying attention and listening and being responsive to teachers, and we're doing the work together with them.
Thank you. And so, Angela, I want to bring it over to you and ask you, how do performance assessments connect to or integrate with other initiatives or goals in your context?
One of the things that we really didn't want to do in this process was add one more thing to educators' plates. We didn't want this to become a checkbox or a checklist, because that has a tendency to happen, especially when you have policy initiatives from the state. So currently in some of our efforts, we are working with our local systems, those that are involved in our PLC and others, to build upon things that are valued and working locally. So it's a very asset-based approach to how do we think about integrating these practices that support high quality performance assessment development, and where can we give up some of the practices that become barriers or are not supportive of the values that we hold, because we all know that there's that little thing that's in the middle that we hold on to things because we've always done them. But learning how to really identify those things and identify them well is something that we're working with our districts on. And because, like many states, we're local control, we're learning how to do this with our districts in the beginning, almost like a one-on-one, but we're creating some guidance and some practices out of that will help districts go through this process. Now, that being said, that's what's working on the side of with our districts, but internally at CDE, we are also looking at places to integrate. So, I'm working closely with our standards and instructional support office around complementary formative practices and curriculum embedded performance assessments, things like that. Working with our school improvement office so they can begin to think about what other ways might they include within their accountability structures, things like performance assessment that's done in a real high quality way. Same with our educator effectiveness unit. I mean, how are we helping our teachers become more skilled in their ability to be able to integrate performance assessment ideas into their classrooms. And so that's one of the ways that we're really thinking about making sure that this initiative or these efforts, I don't even want to call it an initiative because it makes it sound separate, but these efforts don't become one more checkbox, that we want to integrate them seamlessly into good work that's already existing.
Thank you. And this next question is for Beth. What have you learned about how performance assessment has impacted your students in their lives beyond their high school years?
Thanks, Paul. So that's part of our project in Learning That Matters, is we keep in touch with students who have gone through the capstone process, or even if they just experience, performance tasks in high school. And so what we're finding when you look at the interviews with some of the students is that truly these experiences have had a positive impact on their later lives. We're not looking comparatively. We're not actually at this point talking to students who didn't have those experiences and doing any comparative studies, but we are having conversations and really trying to drill down to figure out with them what was it about the performance assessment experience, the capstone experience, that they felt did transfer to their current experiences, wherever they are, in college, teaching, wherever they are in the workforce and what have you. What are they seeing that they can point back to and say, hey, that thing really helped me be able to do this? And we are seeing that those soft skills or the competencies and the profile and portrait of a graduate competencies are the things that they are pointing back to the most. As Vera is pointing out toward, right, that communication skill, and that they're able to say, I learned how to collaborate, I learned how to communicate, I learned how to analyze, I learned how to do work that mattered to me and to the world, and to have intellectual contributions that they felt were valued. And so those are the things that we're hearing again and again, which is hopeful. And so we want more of that to happen, is the goal.
So thank you, Beth, and thank you to the panel. And we have really one final question, and I'd like you to give us one quick brief answer because we're running a little behind. What advice do you have for either policymakers or people interested in advancing performance assessment, either at the state or district level? We'll start with Young Wan.
So my short answer would be to invest in teacher professional learning. And to do that through listening and figuring out, what needs to happen, and going that way.
Thank you. Angela?
I would say that you need to find yourself a partner, an intermediary, as we call them in some of our work. So for example, in Colorado, we have the Colorado Education Initiative. And they have been instrumental in allowing some additional research work to take place and additional advocacy work to take place that cannot be done within the State Department of Education. So that would be one. The other is look for your Trojan horses, as my colleague Elliot Asp says. Look for policies that have open doors, places that you can begin to elevate existing things that you feel like have the opportunity to move forward.
Thank you, Angela. Beth?
I would say get teachers and students together in that professional development experience and have some co-collaboration and co-creation. If it's going to matter to students, students should be invested in the project and product as well.
Thank you all, and thanks to the panel. Because we're running short of time, we're going to try to answer a number of the questions in the chat, and we're going to now pass it to Justin.
Thank you, Paul, and thanks everybody, panelists and moderators. That was and I want to give a particular shout out to Vera right now, who really has keyed me into, I think, a favorite new word that I want to start, and I'll credit you, Vera, around thinking about performance assessment, and that is the verb to shape. Just absolutely loved this concept of thinking about, like, you know, how are we shaping assessments? And I would add, I even like to, some of you have heard me, you know, feel like it's nice to kind of even demystify the concept of performance assessment to the simpler term of challenge. What are the challenges? What is the shape of the challenges that we're having students engaging in? And I think that when we heard from the moderators, we also are asking the question, like, you know, how are these challenges being shaped, and who's doing the shaping? Vera, I think, beautifully let us know that, like, when students are involved in the shaping of the significant, meaningful challenges they're engaging in, it takes it to a whole nother level. So yeah, I just invite everyone to be thinking about the performance assessment system building is about a collective shaping of the challenges students are being asked to meet. And what happens beautifully is that by meeting the challenge, it's a proof. Meeting the challenge proves what you're capable of, not simply to the world, but equally, if not more important, proving to yourself, proving to the learner herself. And I think we saw that in that exchange between Yvonne and Vera. So anyway, those are just some thank you for this very thought-provoking exchange today. And I just really appreciate it, but I'm going to take that with me, because I've been using the word to design often in thinking about this, but there's something about the word to shape that I think maybe even is more elemental about what this is about. Let's see, with that, I guess next slide. Yeah, I also wanted to take this moment to just, you know, in terms of the collective of different learning communities and organizations involved in some of this concept of shaping performance assessment systems. A lot of what's been involved in today's work grew out of the California Performance Assessment Collaborative, CPAC, and Envision Learning Partners, the organization I'm involved with, has been a proud member of this for a long time. And I just want to thank the California Performance Assessment Collaborative for its now many years running kind of discussion about these topics. And we really see evidence that more and more students are engaged in the kinds of challenges that and Vera were, and it's just been a great community.
Thank you so much, Justin, for closing us out with those wonderful reflections. And I completely echo everything that you've shared. Vera really has, I think, shaped our thinking with the way that she has really put shapes at the forefront of our conversation. Elizabeth, if you wouldn't mind bringing the slides back up just really briefly. I know we're running very tight on time, but in the spirit of today's conversation around assessment and continuous improvement, we know that we as adult learners and as adult thinkers are not excluded from that. So we will be sharing a link in the chat to a feedback form that we would greatly appreciate if you would fill out. It should take only about 2 minutes of your time, but that will help us to know what worked for you today, what you'd like to see in next conversations, and make sure that we know how to keep in touch with you. So I believe we're going to share that link in the chat, but folks can also feel free to scan that QR code if they would prefer. And as you are filling that out, we just want to share a couple of upcoming opportunities. If this conversation has sparked things for you and you want to keep it going, our wonderful partners at Envision Learning are hosting some lounges, both tomorrow, Thursday the 18th, as well as in December, on December 16th. And Justin, do you want to share anything more about what those are going to look like?
Sure. No agenda. That's kind of I think the feature with the new Envision Learning Partners Lounge, monthly kind of happy hour kind of gathering, obviously time zone dependent, and yeah, it's just a place for folks that are interested in or identify as part of the performance assessment movement to come together. And we kind of break into some smaller groups and come up with some topics on the spot that people want to chat about. We've done one so far. It was just super energizing. And we've got another one this weekend. And they're going to happen every month. So you can kind of come whenever it's convenient, but it's kind of a nice unstructured way to do some community building around this movement.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That sounds like a great experience. Definitely really encourage folks to look into that. And then if you could just go back really quickly, we have one more opportunity from our folks at CPAC, and they will be doing a learning series on assessment coming up. And I'm just going to ask Jeanette if she would like to speak a little bit to that.
Hi, can you hear me?
You're good.
Okay, great. So I have an echo here, but we are kicking off a series with different learning modules for the next semester to help people identify challenges and opportunities around performance assessment in their system, whether it's a school or a district or some kind of network, even county offices of education. And our first module is going to be on performance assessments, followed by supports and data practices later in the spring. So we invite you to check out the flyer I posted in the, oh, I got the wrong link. Sorry about that. Charlie put the correct link in there to read more about our offerings and to register for them.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeanette. And thank you for folks for sticking with us to the end. I know we're 1 minute over, but thank you again so much for joining us. Thank you so much to our incredible moderators. Thank you so much to Vera for taking time out of your day to be with us as a student. Thank you to all our incredible panelists. We appreciate you all so much. Again, thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and you keep in contact with us so we can continue the conversation.